Hi, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a second. Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Carr, and I'm Chief Knowledge Broker for Octo, Open Communications for the Ocean. Um, for those of you not familiar with Octo, we're an NGO that connects ocean professionals to the knowledge and networks they need through our webinar series and our MPA Help, EBM Help Ocean Plastic List communities. Octo also provides custom consulting services. Um, We'd like to welcome today's presenters on a webinar on identifying and prioritizing a portfolio of marine and coastal conservation finance solutions. We'd like to welcome David Meyers with the Conservation Finance Alliance, John Bohorquez of Blue Economy Solutions Lab and the Conservation Finance Alliance, and Joss Hill with the Conservation Finance Alliance's Marine and Coastal Working Group. Today's webinar will last for an hour, and the formal presentation and demonstration of the tool will be followed by a question and answer period. You can submit questions to Dave, John, and Joss through the question panel or the chat. The question panel is a little bit easier to moderate, but if you wanted input from others on the webinar, then feel free to use the chat and make the question visible to all. And we allow you to use the chat for sharing pertinent information relative to the information pertinent to the webinar. We just ask that you keep all conversation on the chat relevant and professional. A recording of today's webinar is going to be available later today at www.octogroup.org/webinars. So thank you everyone for being here today, and a huge shout out to David, John, and Joss for the work that they've done and for sharing it with us today. I'll turn it over to them now so we can learn more about the tool.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. So today, my colleagues and I will introduce a new pilot tool that we've been developing to assist conservation practitioners identify finance solutions for marine and coastal projects. I'll introduce why we developed the tool and the niche it fills. David will discuss how the tool is structured, and John's going to walk through a case study to show you how to use the tool. Next slide, please. So as we all know, marine conservation is chronically underfunded, and this puts coastal marine ecosystems such as coral reefs, mangrove, seagrasses at great risk, including the communities that depend on them. In the Ocean Protection Gap report released at the United Nations Ocean Conference this year shows that while only 1.2 billion currently flows to marine protection each year, investing 15.8 billion annually could unlock 85 billion in returns and avoided costs by 2050. So to bridge this gap, we've got to deploy finance solutions at scale. Next slide. So what is conservation finance? Many people think it's simply about raising more money, but it's bigger than that. It's about changing the system that conservation outcomes are making sure conservation outcomes are properly resourced. So the Conservation Finance Alliance defines it as mechanisms and strategies that generate, manage, and deploy financial resources and align incentives to achieve sustainable nature conservation outcomes. So it's not just about bringing in new funds. It's really about aligning, sort of using tools to make projects more efficient and leveraging policy to align incentives with conservation. And so this definition and framework was adopted by the newly released IUCN Practice Guidance for Protected and Conserved Area Finance that I believe there was a webinar introducing this morning. So to meet this need, there's been a lot of momentum growing in the marine conservation finance field in recent years, which is super exciting. We've got new tools, we've got blue bonds, reef insurance, blended finance, more funders, coalitions and governments engaging, projects that are showing impact, and a growth of resources. And I popped a few just as examples for this slide. So the framework for evaluating financial sustainability of MPAs that John Bohorquez developed, our other speaker, the BIOFIN workbook, which offers detailed guidance for governments at the national scale for biodiversity finance, or has recently launched a blue bond incubator and the Reef Resilience Network and Blue Nature Alliance developed a Marine Protected Area Finance Toolkit. So the energy is real, but we've got to broaden access and participation. Next slide. So to help build this conservation finance capacity, CFA established the Marine and Coastal Finance Working Group, and our purpose is to advance conservation finance solutions for marine and coastal ecosystems, especially coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrasses, by building knowledge, capacity, and collaboration among practitioners. And so a small team within this group developed this tool to bridge the resource gap that we saw. And this is, although we've discussed that there's an increasing number of tools in existence now, we still understand that practitioners need support pulling this information into practice, and hiring experts isn't always practical or affordable. Next slide, please. So this tool's designed to give practitioners a structured way to think about their options and support brainstorming appropriate solutions based on their unique situation. So it's bottom-up and actionable. It's not just about national policy. It was designed for a variety of different conservation contexts and not just focused on marine protected areas. At its core, it's a workbook that helps practitioners really understand the specifics of their project situation and provides a sort of detailed, comprehensive process for exploring options. So it's not a guide to finance mechanisms. These exist, but rather it's a way to operationalize this theory around aligning fundraising and incentives. The workbook's flexible, so you don't need to fill in all of the cells in every table, but it's really about providing structure for your thought process. And so this tool is going to help you identify a set of solutions, but you do still need to do a feasibility analysis afterwards. So I'm going to pass on to David now, who's going to dive deeper into how the tool is structured.
Thank you, Joss. Thanks for that introduction. We and greatly appreciate your leadership as the chair of the Marine and Coastal Finance Working Group at the CFA. So I'm going to kind of walk us through just how the tool is structured, and then Johnny's going to provide a more detailed example. So there's, I guess you could say there's four major components of this tool. The first is to assess the situation. The second is looking at current planning and how you may use planning to help you identify different finance solutions. Then there are four guidelines. The tool itself lists them as filters, but now that with the release of the Protected and Conserved Area Finance Guide, we're calling them guidelines. So that's how I'll refer to them in this. And then the last step is prioritizing the finance solutions. So the situation analysis seeks to create a foundation from which you can identify finance solutions with, the important reminder that finance solutions really need to be tailored to the specific situation that you're looking to address. And so the tool suggests you describe the natural and cultural assets, the different ecosystem services which are important for the area, what your specific conservation outcomes you're trying to achieve are, what the threats and underlying drivers or root causes of those threats are, because you're going to address them as well with some of the solutions, who your key stakeholders are, and their relationship to your conservation outcomes and the natural resources. So that's sort of first phase. And then the second is on the planning, the second step, where you're trying to really build more of a financial picture. You're looking at the activities that you have identified, their cost structures, their relationship to the conservation outcomes, what existing finance mechanisms that you have in place, and then how the activities that you've chosen to implement, how they relate to the outcomes and the different finance solutions. Step 3 is really going to go through a series of sheets, worksheets that look at these four different practice guidelines for PCA finance, and again, they're called filters in the guide, but they're four of them here. I'm going to go into them in detail. One is optimizing resource efficiencies. Second is discouraging harmful actions. The third is incentivizing positive actions, and the fourth is increasing financial capital for conservation. And as Joss was saying, you don't start with the fourth one. We all know we're underfunded, but let's look at the first three before we say, okay, we need more money. Because the first three are quite useful. So in terms of optimizing resource efficiencies, this is a great opportunity to see how you can achieve your conservation outcomes with the resources that you have on hand. And, what are the current planned activities that you have? And how are they likely to achieve the outcomes that you want? So you kind of review the existing current planned activities. Are there other actions or activities that you could change or prioritize that could have greater impact more rapidly or with lower cost or effort? And then are there other actors that are better suited to be implementing? Can you outsource that kind of thing? So again, options to consider: alternate actions, outsourcing, maybe partnerships, and then things that are more related to policy like biodiversity mainstreaming or institutional restructuring. Oftentimes the institution itself requires some streamlining for effectiveness and implementation. The second guideline is discouraging harmful actions. A lot of costs at the sites are driven by the threats and the pressures on the site. So it's really important to figure out how you can use finance solutions and different mechanisms to mitigate those threats, thereby potentially decreasing your costs. It doesn't eliminate all your costs, but nature has an incredible ability to be resilient. If you can reduce the threats, you can help enormously. It's an efficient approach where you're really directing activities towards those, as I say, cost generators and those that are threatening your outcomes. And then it usually works on a polluter pays principle. So if there's a company or actor or stakeholder that's causing problems, if you focus on them and get them to either change their behavior or compensate for their behavior, that's helpful. And then it will use a lot of economic instruments such as fees, taxes, fines, and penalties. You want to also look where there's opportunities. This is larger scale, but where you can perhaps redirect or restructure public subsidies that are harmful, like fishery subsidies. And then other effective area-based conservation measures, OECMs, are opportunities where you can balance sustainable use with conservation and an area that is worth exploring and developing there. The third guideline is incentivizing positive actions, identifying those key stakeholders and partners that can act in ways that directly or indirectly support your conservation outcomes. There's a range of economic, fiscal, and policy mechanisms you can use to align their interests and get them to work together. And then note that key partners also provide in-kind support, that whether they're the communities that are living and working in that area or tourist operators or other NGOs, that there's a whole group of people who are already aligned. How do you work better with them? How do you bring them on board? And then finally, raising additional capital for conservation. The goal here being increasing the availability and also the long-term financial sustainability of those sources to assure long-term conservation outcomes. And where you can align the goals of increasing capital with the other guidelines or filters, it's a really efficient outcome. Whether you can if you can reduce the threats and capture revenue, let's say through a green tax or something like that, that could be very helpful. Make sure that you can allocate all or a significant portion of those revenues towards your conservation outcomes. And a final note here, that conservation doesn't need to pay for itself. The sites that you're managing don't have to be self-sufficient in funding. They deserve to receive funding from outside sources, whether it's government or private partners or others. You can't solve all the problems yourself. And then finally, the step 4 is final prioritization of your finance solutions. So the way that this works is that you go through all those steps I mentioned before. generate a list of, use those guidelines and all the information to sort of generate a list of potential finance solutions and mechanisms that could be improved. Then you, together with the group that you're working with, you identify your assessment criteria. You can bring stakeholders in and experts to do a workshop or something like that. You hold that workshop and you collaboratively assign criteria and prioritize your solutions. And ultimately, you want to do a detailed feasibility study on those, and you want a portfolio of finance solutions. Even a small site needs to think about a diversity of solutions. One top priority solution is not necessarily going to solve all your financing needs. On that, I'm passing it over to John to take us through a bit more of the detail on the mechanism and an example. Johnny, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, David, and thanks, Josh, for opening up the presentation and presenting the kind of foundation and the structure of the tool. So what I'm going to do first is I'll walk everyone through how to access the tool, noting that we have two types of documents here that are both available on the Conservation Finance Alliance website. First, there's the PDF, or kind of like a workbook that serves as really the reference guide or instruction manual for the tool itself. And then the real interactive tool is in the form of an Excel sheet that's more for interactive use of the methodology. Next slide, please. And the Excel tool is comprised of 11 tabs that are mostly representing each individual step, or formally filters guidelines. As you walk through the tool, so each step has its own dedicated tab, and I'll walk everyone through those eventually, but so everyone knows kind of what the whole thing looks like. The first tab is on the first step, which is the situation or kind of contextual analysis, followed by site management and budget planning, kind of a way of looking at where the resources available now. And then going through formally the filters, the guidelines through the 4 filters on effective use of resources, discouraging harmful actions, incentivizing positive actions, and increasing capital for conservation that David just walked us through. Followed by the actual tools by which you get some sort of quantitative result or metric from which to prioritize different financial solutions, including our own rapid priority list, some guidelines for how to use that, and then a more detailed priority list that's kind of more of a supplemental component here. And then at the end, there are some tabs, including the drop-down menu and another called drivers to solutions, that are really more technical tabs. These can be used to kind of customize the tool in certain ways, but we don't recommend modifying those unless you're very experienced with Excel. And next slide, please. And before I start sharing my screen, I'll walk us through a hypothetical case study that we'll use to really form the basis of some of the examples I'll be showing you. And so for this hypothetical case study, we'll be working with, or putting ourselves in the position of a local NGO working to conserve coral reefs and mangroves within a bay. Some of the conservation activities happening in this bay include an MPA, as well as sustainable community-based fisheries management. And the threats include harmful fishing or illegal fishing from groups outside of the local community, as well as illegal mangrove deforestation within the MPA. And also keeping in mind that this tool can look at finance solutions beyond an MPA, looking at some of the threats that originate outside of an MPA, also sedimentation and pollution from deforestation and agriculture on land. So with that, I'll start sharing my screen. So to start on where we can access the tool, it's fairly easy to find on the CFA website. If you navigate to the menu here on the right, and you go down, this is output of the Marine and Coastal Finance Working Group. So if you see working groups, the Marine and Coastal Finance, you'll see down here a mention of a new publication, which is the Marine and Coastal Conservation Finance Solutions Prioritization Tool. You can select download full text here, which takes you to this page, which provides an overview of the tool and buttons to download the PDF I mentioned, the guidance note and worksheet, which is the Excel sheet, and also a link here where you can access it on another hosting platform called ResearchGate. And again, we have both this PDF that really serves as like the reference material or the instruction manual, and then the tool itself, which I'll walk us through one tab at a time. Again, the examples I'll be sharing are for, from the point of view of a local NGO conserving coral reefs and mangroves within a bay that has threats, including illegal fishing, mangrove deforestation, and also threats from on land as well, including deforestation and unsustainable agriculture. So the first tab is a situation analysis. This is kind of like the home base for the tool. This is the initiation from which a lot of the other more technical steps kind of draw from. And this is just the initial high level contextual analysis. And one thing I do want to note is the tool can be used in various ways. You can do the entire comprehensive analysis, or you can focus on bit parts as you need to. But this high level context really should be the first step for any use. And it's fairly easy to navigate. This just includes physically writing in these various cells, just background information about your organization, contact information, and including here a link for a management plan. And then we start to, we can again describe the context for this case study of a bay with a local economy historically comprised of small scale fishing and tourism. But we have unsustainable agriculture emerging as a more industrialized sector because of a lack of opportunity in the community and interest from outside groups. Important parts of kind of the background and context here include listing what is the natural capital, or what are the natural assets like? What are the key kind of environmental features for this region? That includes coral reefs, beaches that attract tourists, mangroves, tropical forests on land as well. And what are the top ecosystem services provided here? In this case, that includes coastal protection from the reefs and the mangroves, provision of fishery resources, the recreational and cultural value, water regulation from terrestrial forests and from mangroves, and also carbon sequestration. These are kind of the key high-level steps that are going to ultimately kind of what some of the feasible financial mechanisms could be that are based on what are the types of the environmental features as well as the stakeholders. And so when we think of the stakeholders in the ecosystem services, this is where we also want to list the key beneficiaries of each ecosystem service, which ranges from local communities and tourism operators to visiting tourists from abroad, or in the case of carbon sequestration, really, the world. And it's also important to assess what are your conservation goals and outcomes. And when we say outcomes, we really mean the long-term goals for conservation here. And later I'll explain the difference between outcomes and objectives, but the outcomes for this location hypothetically would be to maintain a high coral cover, to maintain healthy fish stocks, and to maintain healthy connected ecosystems such as mangroves. Next, it's important to start identifying what are the main threats and underlying drivers. So here, as I've explained, there's illegal mangrove deforestation, there's illegal fishing from some outside groups, there's harmful runoff and sedimentation from land-based deforestation and large-scale agriculture. And many of these are, and as we go through these, we list the threat. What is the context of the threat to the area? Is it a direct threat, such as illegal fishing or mangrove deforestation? Or is it more of an indirect threat, like a growing population and lack of economic opportunities? And let's say for illegal fishing, this is one of the features that has a drop-down menu. So it just has two options to select, direct or indirect. And we'd select direct for illegal fishing. Include what are the organizations or actors responsible which in this case might include fishers from outside the community, outside the local area. The geographical scale, most of these threats are local, but perhaps some of the economic issues in this case could be national level. And what's the severity of impact? Again, this is another feature that has a number of the cells have drop-down lists where there's a menu of options to include for inputs, and then associated outcomes, which would be decline in fish stocks, which you would just write in, and severity of impact. Let's say hypothetically might be 3. Once we've established the threats, again, this is where it's important to map out the key stakeholders. So this is just a quick list of all the ones for this case. There are probably more in the real case, but just for sake of simplicity, the time available. This includes local fishers, other local community members, companies that are behind the agricultural activity happening there, the NGO that we're representing here, as well as, of course, local law enforcement, and tourism operators and tourists themselves. So after we kind of establish a high-level context, the tool goes into ascertaining what are the main activities that are happening. So this is just laying out the main conservation activities for each of these outcomes that we identified previously, and that might include, for the first outcome on reduced land-based pollution and sedimentation. The activity there would be sustainable land use. Who are the key actors? What are the historical annual operations budgets for these, if any? Because this is outside of the MPA, we don't really have a budget for this activity at this point. And then optimal annual budget, and then additional investment needed. So let's say for this case, to mitigate illegal fishing from outsiders, there's a current MPA budget of 50,000. We're going to increase that to 100,000. So this is just getting the kind of the financial case of what's available and what's missing. And then what are the current financial mechanisms that are supporting? This is just a list of inputs here. In this case, for this hypothetical scenario, the NGO and the MPA is supported exclusively by hotel fees from tourists that generate that $50,000 per year budget. Again, just a hypothetical scenario. And then we start getting into, once you've established kind of the managerial context, environmental context, the social context, and the resources available and the financial mechanisms available, this is where we start beginning the process of starting to take a high level, almost survey of the different financial mechanisms or solutions that might be available that address those 4 guidelines that Dave has walked us through. And the first one is cost efficiency or effective use of resources. So this is one that looks at what are perhaps some alternative approaches that we could take that might involve some level of cost savings or being able to extend available budget capacity further. And let's go down, because we have kind of a clear scenario for this. Let's look at outcome 3, which is we want to reduce mangrove deforestation. So in this case, we have MPA management, but we know that there's illegal deforestation happening within the MPA. What are some alternative activities that could be looked at that might lead to some degree of cost savings? And one might be, can we engage the local active management rather than deforestation and active management activities? For this example, we don't have a budget, but then we have these 2 factors here, cost savings and impact likelihood. And these are important towards helping to prioritize which kind of cost saving measures should we pursue first, based on how much funding they're going to be saving, and then also what is the conservation impact from those activities. So for community management of mangroves, let's say we have a value of 2 for cost savings, some moderate cost savings, and perhaps moderate impact. Let's compare that, let's say we're weighing that against another solution, which might be satellite-based monitoring of mangrove cover, rather than in-person monitoring of the health of the mangrove forest. And that could provide maybe some cost savings. It's not going to replace all field-based activities, but something. but it might not have the most conservation impacts because it's not helping us actually directly regulate the deforestation taking place. So that gets a lower score. And so for our highest priority alternative, can we write this as a financial solution? So encouraging community management of mangroves, but what is the financial solution to get us there? And that begins to kind of reveal itself as we work through some of the other practice guidelines that show how these 4 practice guidelines, A through D, are also very much interconnected. So the second one, B, is discourage harmful actions. It's pretty straightforward. What are financial solutions that might disincentivize behavior that is negatively affecting the conservation goals? And just to go through one example, let's say we have one driver of degradation here, illegal fishing. We have a drop-down list here. So if you click the arrow of kind of general categories that this might match, we write in the stakeholders, the actors responsible, brainstorm a financial solution, which might be fines and penalties. And we can rewrite this as a finance solution that's fines and penalties for illegal harvest or overfishing in this case, I should say. But you basically just write this part in. So that's just one example. There would be several more in this case if we were to go through it fully. But you'll see at the end, when we go to the priority list, we start to revisit all of the different financial solutions from these different guidelines in a way that we can start to weigh them against one another. So this will come up again. The third category is, what about the opposite from solutions that might discourage harmful activities? What about solutions that might incentivize positive actions? And so there's clear instructions throughout the Excel sheet. In this one, we copy the list of stakeholders from the initial sort of scoping or scenario tab. And we can add more as needed, or we can have multiple rows for each stakeholder for different solutions involving each stakeholder. But let's look at local community members. And this is just a free brainstorm. Again, a lot of these tabs and these components of the tool are really meant to collect and organize the collective knowledge and thoughts of various stakeholders or experts, potentially in a workshop setting. So this can really be quite qualitative at this stage. And for local community members, there might be, what about encouraging beneficial behavior? So this could be, as we mentioned in the cost saving scenario, similar, active management and reforestation of mangroves by the community. What are some financial mechanisms that could help achieve that? Maybe there's some sort of a payment that comes from active restoration and preservation of the mangroves by community members. So payments for preservation and restoration, which rewriting as a specific financial solution, carbon offsets for mangrove preservation and restoration, with potentially some of the funding from that offset going directly to the communities. And you'll notice here at the top, we have a column titled Rewrite Proposed Specific Finance Solution to Table 7.1. So Table 7.1 is at the end of this, where we copy over all the financial solutions identified in these tables into one summary tab that is kind of our priority mechanism scoring chart. And we'll get to that in a minute, but then you can compare this scenario to, we had indirect impacts as well. A lot of these harmful activities or behaviors are coming because of a lack of indirect effects, so lack of economic opportunity. So perhaps another solution here that could engage other local community members could be developing sustainable alternative economic or employment opportunities or alternative livelihoods, which, let's say for this case, could be investments in sustainable aquaculture or other economic opportunities. So it could be grants or return generating investments in other economic sectors that mitigate the threat of mangrove degradation, such as, for example, alternative sustainable aquaculture practices. And then we have additional solutions based around agriculture, including incentives or offsets for, let's say, agroforestry or other, or reducing the use of harmful fertilizers that are the source of nitrogen pollution. So are there potentially payment or crediting systems that can encourage those types of beneficial behaviors? And you'll notice that a lot of the mechanisms that we kind of highlighted here, they also come up when we consider mechanisms for increasing capital for conservation. And again, that shows how a number of these guidelines are kind of interconnected and not entirely siloed. So some examples of increasing capital for conservation could be, we have a number of categories here by which we kind of organize these. So we think, okay, where is the funding coming from? The source category, and then there's the mechanism. And the mechanism, for as far as feasibility here, we consider how with both the sources and the mechanism that's what's transferring the funding from that source to support the conservation objectives. It's important to also consider, well, how familiar are we? What's the track record or the precedent for either of these for the given case? Because the stronger the track record, the more feasible it might be to implement that. So some of the ones that we've outlined for this hypothetical case could be blue carbon offsets that are funded by tourists from abroad looking to offset their carbon footprint, maybe from their flights. And then from these inputs, we get what we call a familiarity score and what to do, like kind of it outlines what's the next step. And that's based on how familiar we are with both the source of funding and the mechanism. So for tourists from abroad, let's say, for example, they had been engaged for donations in other parts of the country, but blue carbon offsets in the voluntary market might be new for the country still, and so that might include a site visit, which might be visiting other or communicating with other locations that have successfully implemented something like this. And again, some of these might not be, there's reference material in the PDF that help describe or definitions of what we mean by these further and more complete than we have time for today. And then from there, you just write in brainstorming really and thinking about where the potential opportunity is here. And then again, we have our financial solution that we copy over to our summary table at the end. So some of the mechanisms for this hypothetical case that could raise funds might include blue carbon offsets from tourists from abroad, maybe terrestrial carbon offsets that could be funded by a tech company. And you'll notice here, there might be more of a precedence for terrestrial carbon offsets, which is still relevant to marine conservation in this case, in which case the familiarity recommendation or score is, okay, maybe this is further along, but there's more of a track record, and we can begin an outreach or pilot program for this. We've also considered maybe to address the issue of pollution from fertilizers, nitrogen crediting schemes here to provide some degree of compensation for alternative agricultural practices, a grant for technical assistance to grow sustainable aquaculture as kind of as an alternative economic opportunity to reduce pressures in other areas. And just to walk us through one example, just so I can show everyone how to use this. Let's take, for example, okay, we've used tourism hotel fees, but there's no tourism entry fee program. So walking through this example, what would these various columns look like for this?
It looks like John froze there.
There would be tourists visiting the Am I back now? Okay. So we'll just walk through this this example for tourism entry fees. We have tourists visiting the MPA, which we write in. You have a drop-down list for the general category of what this is, which would really be individuals. Source familiarity, we don't have an MPA entry payment system here, but let's say there are probably others in the nearby area that do. So we say The financial mechanism is tourism entry fees, which for the financial mechanism category would also be, let's say this would be fees and charges. Let's say probably also use nearby. Going back, I put use nearby for tourists visiting the MPAs, but now I'm recalling that we actually do already have that tourism hotel fee program. So use nearby isn't actually appropriate for this. This is something that is actually ongoing in that tourists are already a source of funding in some regard. So there's that precedent. And what happens here, where we had outreach or pilot for the recommendation, we select ongoing. So there's a greater track record here. And we get a recommendation of enhance, which basically means, okay, this is an opportunity to take perhaps some legal structures that are already in place, and how do we just modify them in order to increase the amount of funding from that source. And again, for all of these terms, there's a explanation of definitions in the PDF. And then we provide a description of what that financial mechanism might look like. This is the table 7.1. This is where we see all of the financial mechanisms from the previous 4 guidelines in one place. Most of them. And this is where we do kind of a rapid prioritization based on the scoring, depending on the conservation impact for each mechanism, the financial impact, how much in resources is this really generating as a proportion of your total needs, or just in general scale, the social impacts, so the impacts on the communities and other stakeholders, and then the likelihood of success. And so this final rapid score here is based on a summary of all of these. So we had fishing penalties in here as a mechanism to discourage harmful behavior. But perhaps in this case, because if we have trouble enforcing illegal fishing as it is, then adding a fine system also probably isn't that feasible until we increase that enforcement capacity. So for the meantime, until that changes, the conservation impact is probably going to be low. If it's not really that enforceable, you probably won't get that much income from it. Social impacts, there might be some benefits there. And again, because of just the enforcement capacity, the likelihood of success is low. So this gets a score of 5, which is quite low to some of the others. We compare that to an MPA entry fee, where it might not have such a direct impact on the conservation outcomes, but it does have the potential to raise a lot of funds. Social outcomes, there's some question, because is this something that's going to discourage tourists from visiting? What are the impacts there? But because of the track record of tourism-based income here, there's a high likelihood of success. So this gives us a higher total rapid score. Similar for blue carbon versus terrestrial carbon. Let's say for terrestrial carbon offsets, there is more of a track record. It could potentially produce more funds. So that gets a slightly higher score over blue carbon. Nitrogen crediting is an example of something that could have really high conservation impacts by reducing the amount of fertilizer-based pollution. Could yield a lot of funding, but let's say this is something that a lot of stakeholders, a lot of the agricultural companies there might not be on board with. We put a 1 for very low likelihood of success, but still has a fairly high sort of rapid score at the end. And just to show how this works here, let's take, for example, an aquaculture grant from a multilateral development bank to provide technical assistance to grow the sustainable aquaculture economy in this area. You can just say, let's say this has a conservation impact of 2. This might generate, it's a grant, it's short term, so the funding isn't that much, but we can give this potentially a really high social score. And if we're familiar with grants from multilateral development banks in this country or in this region, a fairly high likelihood of success, and that gives us a total high rapid score. And I would mention that is some guidance or description of what do we mean by 2 versus 3 versus 4 for these scores. There are descriptions for what the different, what we envision as the correct input should be further here in the Excel sheet. And it's important to cover, what do we take from these results, and also how do we not interpret them. So these results are important for just rapid prioritization. It doesn't mean that one that scores 11 is necessarily going to be more ideal than one that scores a 10. but it helps us select, okay, which ones should we put at the top of the pile to investigate further. It also shows us what their inherent strengths and weaknesses are, based on are there perhaps some legislative issues that are right now impeding the likelihood for success, but maybe those could be addressed to bring that score up in the future, as an example. Elsewhere, we have the questions here. We have a more detailed prioritization list or tool, but it's not, this is more supplemental. This is quite detailed from just a brainstorm of through these different components of the tool. You probably wouldn't have the information to fill this out, but it's here for reference for also other questions for consideration. And then we have these, again, these are, if you want to customize, for example, the categories of financial mechanisms or things like that, you could adjust things here, but again, it's not recommended to modify these last two tabs without a strong understanding of Excel's functions. So that gives us an idea of the tool. And again, all of these tables and the various components are included in the PDF as well, but not in their interactive format. But again, this provides reference for different instructions for how to fill out the different components of the tool as well. So that concludes the presentation of the Excel tool. And I think that means we are transitioning over Q&A.
Okay. Were there any additional slides? I remember you saying that there might be a few additional slides. Is that?
There's just a thank you slide, I think, right here, but
okay.
That we don't need to take up any time with that. But thank you. Here's our links to our let's see if this works. Links to our emails, so to reach out in case you don't have contacts, and we can post them into the chat as well. So, Sarah, over to you for some Q&A.
Yes. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Josh, John, and David. And thank you to everyone for your attention. And okay, so it's a great demonstration and overview. I'd remind everyone for questions, you can put them either in the Q&A or the chat. So for the questions that came in, this was early on in the presentation, and was asking about privately protected areas or conservation businesses where the purpose of operations is conservation. Is there any deferring guidance or that you can think of how would it differ for private entities? So
the same methodology can be used for private entities. It's not it's quite generic. It's was initially designed for sites, site-based management, but it can be used for, it's sort of it's as you saw from John's example. I mean, it's quite flexible. There's a lot of user input that goes into it. So it's not pre-set. It's just a guideline and a way to start thinking through some of the options and some of what you're already doing and how to organize that and think how you could improve that. And so it really works fine for privately protected areas as well.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you, David. There was a question about what is your advice for early career professionals with coastal management backgrounds looking to shift towards sustainable finance opportunities and careers?
I guess I will take this one. Well, my conservation finance in general is getting, a lot of attention. There's a lot of opportunity in this space. The need has been around forever, but now it's really generating some interest. And the advice that I could give is get involved in something that's going to give you experience in anything around in the finance sectors, like it's going to allow you to, look at, let's say business strategy or business finance, banking, microfinance, something that is, you're coming with your conservation and natural science background. Try to figure out how to get experience in more of the financial technical sectors if you can, and that really will bring great value to your opportunities. don't know if John or Joss want to add a bit.
I'm just going to add that, policy is an important part of this as well, to create markets or create incentives. So, think about what it is that you enjoy and pick a piece of this puzzle to get involved in.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Joss. We don't have any other formal questions. Well, there was one that came up. It was just sort of led to a mini discussion about the possibility of making this an AI assisted tool. And so it sounds like our presenters will follow up with the folks who um, asked about that option. Let's see. We do have a question now. Let's see. Do you think the tool works well for whole regions with multiple sites, or would a roll-up approach be better?
Well, I'm happy to take that to start with, but yeah, well, we are so the approach itself can be used at all different levels. I think we initially designed it to address site-based issues, but if you're looking at a system, you could probably do a lot of the same activities. But it's important to remember that different finance mechanisms work at different levels. There are some finance solutions that are only appropriate to the local level, and others that are require national level action. And for example, a blue bond or something is not something you're going to do at a local level. You're going to, you know, you need to do it kind of at a much larger scale. So it depends on the mechanism, and absolutely can be used at a larger level. And we're going to use a version of this. We are using versions of this tool for different landscapes and almost at a country level. We're going to try to pilot it at a country level. We also are about to launch a few pilots. I don't think we mentioned early on, but we are looking for partners that want to pilot this. We're happy to figure out ways to work together to develop it, improve it as we go. It really is a pilot. It's a first draft, and it definitely will benefit from testing and improvement.
Thank you, David. And just to read a comment that came into the questions, and it's not visible to everyone. Um, our experiences of 30 years, and this is from Chumbe Island, are that private investment into marine privately protected areas is more attractive than into terrestrial privately protected areas because the spillover effect of effectively managed no-take zones and MPAs creates win-win situations for all resource users, tourist operators, local fishers, and others. Okay, and thank you to Sybil for that. Let's see, we'll go on with some questions. How important is it to involve key stakeholders, including government, in the process? And what is your advice for getting engagement?
I can take that just to mix this up. We were thinking that ideally people using this tool would kind of pull together a few stakeholders because, as we mentioned, this tool is designed to help support structured brainstorming and help organize those brainstorms in a useful way. And so I think it's going to be most useful if you could put together a workshop and actually get a few of your stakeholders from sort of, different types of stakeholders involved in brainstorming.
Okay, thank you, Joss. There was a request for the filled out Excel example John was working on. What's the best way? Is I think probably if Leeway contacted John, then he could send it. So if there are others who are interested in that, maybe we can pop up the emails addresses are in the chat, but we could also pop it up again at the very end in order to be able to share that filled in example. Okay. Another question, as regards to the spreadsheet-based tool, would it be possible to use weights to get the final rapid assessment scores? Thank you.
Sure, I'll take that on a technical level. Yeah, this is just a pilot version. So right now for the rapid assessment score, it's just a sum of all the categories. But I think as this is tested, that certainly is something that could easily be incorporated into it. And I think through the pilot testing phase, we'll get a sense of, we'll stress test various components of these and see how they need to be modified along the way.
Okay, thanks, John.
And just as another example, I mean, people have used this builds from the original BIOFIN rapid prioritization tool, and although that only had 3 categories, this has 4. It actually one of the steps that we suggest is that you look through these criteria and make them your own. I mean, maybe those 4 are not the ones that are the most important. So you make sure that the categories and the criteria and the scoring are based on what your vision of where you want to go is, and definitely you can put weights in to produce an end score that is more compatible. Say that your top priority is cultural, or communities. You can definitely increase the weight for that, or biodiversity or finance or whatever it is that your priorities are.
All right, thank you, Dave. This is a comment, but and perhaps you'll want to respond to it. A time scale component for potential solutions could be good to incorporate. Carbon credits take a long time to generate.
That's a great point, and the example of kind of what I was just saying, like we have that criteria, which is likelihood of success, which is a kind of bucket category. These are, again, rapid sort of, the idea is to do a crowdsource of feedback to prioritize this rapidly before you dig much more deeper into it. That allows you, and the reason why we do that rapid prioritization is because it allows you to brainstorm freely. And remember, in brainstorming, no idea is a bad idea. And so you want to kind of like really write down everything that you think might be possible. And when we, as Josh was saying in the beginning, I mean, we talk about aligning incentives as part of finance, anything that's going to influence prices and markets, and really almost anything that's going to influence market-based behavior could fall into the finance category. And so, and even beyond finance, there are ways to incentivize behavior that should be included. You just throw everything into this package, and then you can, then you and another point I wanted to emphasize from what John was saying, when you describe the finance solutions for that rapid prioritization, be as specific as you possibly can. So don't just put down. Obviously we did this quickly so that we could get through a lot and be clear. But if you're going to do entrance fees, for example, don't just put down entrance fees. Put down, establishment of park entrance fees at 3 locations, priced at $5 per person for national, $15 per person for international. Be as specific as you possibly can, because you want to be able to compare that with an entrance fee, only captured from tourist boats. When you run into them, different costs, different returns, and different prices. So you want to be able to kind of hone in as best you can on actual concrete solutions. And so be as specific as you can when you describe what the finance solutions are.
Hi. Thank you, Dave. Let's see, another comment that came in, sort of is the local NGO together with local community can apply for funding for biodiversity finance through partnership with local users and stakeholders at large. I think that's more of a statement than a question. And then we have another question. Maybe you mentioned this and I missed it. If this was done in a workshop with a few close collaborators, how much time would a first credible pass require if you already have some basic planning information for the situation analysis?
I think that's partly why we're inviting people to pilot it and give us feedback and let us know. I think our kind of stab in the dark is we're advising that ideally teams have their objectives and budgets kind of drafted so that you can input that in, and we use the conservation standards as like a kind of guidance template for how we designed it. I think you could try a day's workshop. I think probably it might take a couple of iterations, but I think we'd just love to hear your feedback on how this goes so that we can sharpen up that guidance.
Okay, thank you, Joss. And there are already a couple of offers to do pilots at the end of the comments or at the end of the chat, and I'll be providing information on who said what to you so you can be in further contact with folks. If you don't mind pulling up the last slide with your emails, we'll just have that up for a second. And for anyone who needs them, they are also in the chat. Perfect. That's good. All right. Well, thank you so much, David, Joss, and John. We so appreciate you doing this work in the first place to make this process better and more successful for the rest of us. And we very much appreciate you coming on to talk about the pilot tool. And we look forward to hearing how things go with the pilots and people have offered to do. And yeah, thank you again. And thank you to everyone who was able to attend today. We hope to see you in future webinars. Actually, David will be presenting on the practice guidelines that he talked about at the beginning of this webinar in a webinar in November too. So stay tuned for that announcement. But thank you again. We so appreciate you being on, guys, and we look forward to having you present this tool in an update in the years to come.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks all.